In Ohio, Curtis looks at the enormous clouds in the sky while he stands in the rain, confused because it seems that, instead of water, motor oil is falling. Afterwards, Curtis has breakfast with his wife, Samantha, and his deaf and mute daughter, Hannah. Before going to work, Curtis works for a construction company, while Samantha is a stay-at-home mom who takes care of Hannah, but also sews things to sell at the local market on Saturdays. That afternoon, Samantha is having fun with some friends at home who brought their kids over to play. One of them notices that Hannah grabbed a dangerous piece of wood with nails, so Samantha has to run to stop her, since yelling warnings obviously doesn't work. Moments later, it starts to rain hard, so the construction workers have to stop for the day. At home, Samantha teaches Hannah the sign for storm while watching the rain through the window. After the bar, Curtis drops his co-worker and dear friend DeWatt off at home. They talk for a bit and DeWatt says that Curtis is living a wonderful life. However, Curtis admits that things aren't always as nice as they seem. Their conversation is interrupted when DeWatt's wife comes out, silently demanding that he come inside. Later, Curtis goes home and checks on Hannah, while Samantha shares that the girl still has a hard time connecting with other kids. The next day, Curtis is cleaning up the trash so Hannah doesn't grab other dangerous things. At that moment, a heavy storm appears in the sky, and suddenly, a lightning bolt hits the ground, making Curtis's dog, Red, start barking like crazy. When Curtis gets close to hold Hannah's hand, the dog breaks free from its chain and attacks him, biting his arm fiercely. However, Curtis wakes up in his room as it was another nightmare. During breakfast, Curtis can't stop thinking about how real the dream felt. He sees Hannah playing with Red and gets worried, so he pulls her away from the dog. When Samantha asks what's wrong, Curtis loses his temper and leaves without touching his breakfast. Later at work, Curtis is still distracted and can't stop looking at his arm during a meeting, thinking he still feels the pain. The boss, Jim, is mad about the delay caused by the rain and wants them to make up the time today. On the way to the site, Curtis asks Stuart to help him get some extra supplies first. Later, Curtis takes a break and sees a flock of blackbirds in the sky, flying in strange patterns. He asks DeWatt if he thinks that's weird, but DeWatt didn't see anything. Because of the overtime used to catch up on the delayed work, Curtis arrives late for the parent-teacher meeting at Hannah's school. He's also covered in mud because he couldn't take a shower. They learn more about sign language, which is essential for their kids, and which Curtis needs to practice more. Since he doesn't spend as much time with Hannah as Samantha does, he still doesn't know enough words. Sometime later, it's raining again, and Curtis runs to get in the car with his daughter. The rain makes it hard to see, and they end up crashing. Curtis's head is bleeding, but Hannah is okay. At that moment, men appear outside the car and start to break the windows. One holds Curtis, while the other kidnaps the girl. Suddenly, Curtis wakes up screaming, realizing it was another dream. Afterwards, he comes downstairs looking pretty sick. Samantha notices and gets worried, but Curtis promises it's just a cold and tells her to go to the market with Hannah, while Samantha sells her products and argues with customers about prices. Curtis gets the extra supplies he got from work and builds a fence around the doghouse, locking Red in it and apologizing to the poor dog. He was supposed to be working cleaning up the trash, but gets distracted by a door that leads to a storm shelter. Curtis looks for the key in an old jar and manages to open it, so he goes down to consider a new idea. Later that night, Samantha puts away the money she made at the market with their vacation savings. She asks Curtis why Red is outside now, but Curtis gives a vague answer. Samantha tries again, but Curtis ignores her to listen to the news, where they're talking about a gas leak that affected a small family. This feeds Curtis's paranoia. The next day, he finds Hannah watching the storm from the window. When he gets closer, he's scared to see a man outside looking at them. Curtis immediately grabs Hannah in his arms and runs to hide, while the man starts trying to open the door. Suddenly, the whole building starts to shake, and all the objects in the living room levitate, while Curtis has a hard time breathing. Then, everything falls, and Curtis gasps as he wakes up from another nightmare. To his shock, he wet the bed. When Samantha comes in, he covers the accident with the blankets. Curtis asks for the doctor's number, and Samantha tries to check on him out of concern, but Curtis pushes her away so she won't see the wet sheets. He apologizes immediately for his outburst, blaming it on feeling sick, but still tells her to go to church because he can take care of Hannah. After Samantha leaves, Curtis changes the sheets and washes the evidence. Later, Curtis takes Hannah to the library and distracts her with a children's book while he looks for information on mental illnesses. On the way back, they stop at a grocery store to buy a lot of canned food. This makes them late for lunch with Hannah's family, who judges him for skipping church. In the afternoon, Curtis starts to clean the storm shelter and stores all the canned food he brought for emergencies. Afterwards, he stays there, reading the books from the library. Sometime later, Curtis finally manages to see a doctor and explains that he's been having trouble sleeping for 4 days. At first, the doctor thinks it's no big deal, so Curtis also tells him about the nightmares, admitting he wet the bed and that he kept feeling the pain from the dog bite. The doctor agrees to give him pills for a few days and tells him to see a psychiatrist in Columbus. Meanwhile, Samantha visits the insurance agency to ask about the operation to restore Hannah's hearing. Luckily, her request is approved and all expenses will be covered because Curtis's job offers a very good policy. At the same time, Curtis goes to the pharmacy to get his prescription and is surprised to learn he doesn't have to pay much thanks to his insurance. That night, the family has a wonderful dinner together while they celebrate the good news, but Curtis doesn't tell her about the medicine. While getting ready for bed, Samantha already starts making plans for their vacation since they don't have to worry about money anymore. Curtis secretly takes his pill in the bathroom. The next morning, Curtis wakes up feeling well rested and Samantha notices he looks healthier too. However, at work, Curtis still talks to Duart about the right amount of food for a shelter. Suddenly, he starts to hear thunder in the sky, which is still clear. He asks Duart, and he doesn't hear anything. Then, Curtis panics and runs to a dumpster to throw up, fighting a panic attack. Curtis leaves work and starts having trouble breathing while driving, so he stops the car to get back control. When he finally calms down, he notices a place that sells shipping containers and buys one to expand the shelter. Moments later, Curtis visits his mom, who is acting weird because she's heavily medicated. It turns out she developed paranoid schizophrenia at the same age Curtis is now. He's worried the same thing might be happening to him and tries to ask a few questions, but she doesn't remember much from those stressful years. Afterwards, Curtis calls his doctor to explain he can't drive to Columbus to see a psychiatrist, so he asked for an alternative. That night, he calculates how much it would cost to turn the shelter into a full bunker. The next morning, he goes to the bank and takes out a home improvement loan without telling his wife and ignoring the agent's warnings. Later at work, Curtis asks Duart for help because he wants to borrow some equipment from work to build his bunker. This is against the rules, but Duart agrees to help. Worried, Duart also asks if Curtis is okay, and Curtis assures him he is. After work, Curtis goes to see a local counselor and lays out all his theories based on the research he's done. The woman explains that she's just a counselor, so she can't diagnose him or prescribe anything, but they can talk so she can guide him through his crisis. He starts talking about his mom, who one day left the family, and his dad had to raise him and his brother. Later, she was found eating trash from a dumpster, and they had to put her in a state hospital. He also starts talking about his dreams. At night, the family goes to another school meeting. On the way back, Curtis stops the car because he's seeing a lot of lightning in the sky. However, his family is still asleep, and no other driver reacts, which makes him worry more about his mental health. On Saturday, while Samantha and Hannah are at the market, Curtis and Duart start working on the shelter. When Samantha gets home and sees everything, she freaks out and a fight starts. Samantha gets angrier when she hears Curtis took out a loan and yells, demanding an explanation for all his weird decisions lately, like locking up Red. However, Curtis says there's nothing to explain and leaves the room to check on Hannah, while Samantha has a breakdown. That night, Curtis takes more pills than he should. In the middle of the night, Samantha wakes up and finds Curtis having a seizure and bleeding beside her. She immediately calls an ambulance, ignoring Curtis when he says it's not necessary. Moments after the paramedics leave, Curtis finally tells Samantha everything. He swears he's been going to the counselor frequently because he doesn't want to leave his family like his mom did. The next day, Curtis and Samantha take Hannah to the hospital for a checkup, and her surgery is scheduled for 6 weeks from now. At work, Curtis goes to see his boss and asks to take Duart off his crew because he doesn't want to give orders to his best friend. Jim finds this weird but agrees, before pointing out that Curtis has missed a lot of work. Curtis explains it's because of Hannah's doctor visits, but Jim gives him a warning. After work, Curtis goes to a store to buy gas masks, which end up being very expensive. Meanwhile, Dewart's wife tells Samantha about the rumors regarding Curtis's behavior, but Samantha gets defensive. Sometime later, Curtis is working in the shelter when his brother Kyle shows up, worried about the strange things he heard from Samantha. Kyle is concerned about Curtis's health, but Curtis insists he's fine and tells Kyle to visit their mom. It's clear the brothers have a kind of weird relationship. Before he leaves, Curtis remembers he was looking for a dog and asks Kyle to take Red. On a rainy afternoon, Curtis walks into the kitchen and finds Samantha soaked from the rain. They stare at each other for a moment before she considers grabbing a knife. However, this is another dream. At breakfast, Curtis can't shake the weird feeling from the nightmare, and when Samantha tries to touch his hand, he pulls away. At that moment, they notice Jim waiting outside. Curtis rushes to meet him and hears horrible news. Jim found out about the equipment Curtis took illegally and fires him, leaving only 2 more weeks of health insurance. Dewart was also suspended without pay for 2 weeks for helping Curtis. When Curtis tells Samantha the news, she slaps him before leaving the room with Hannah. Later, Curtis goes to see his counselor and finds out she was transferred and there's a new guy. This new counselor wants to start from the beginning, but Curtis can't stand to talk about his mom again and lose all his progress, so he leaves without saying a word. Curtis goes back to the shelter and keeps working on it. Meanwhile, Samantha keeps mending the neighbor's clothes to make some extra cash, but it's not enough, and she has to take the rest of their vacation savings. At night, Samantha talks with Curtis, who explains the scare was because of a dream and holds her hand to prove he's trying. Samantha announces they're going to cancel the beach trip and use Curtis's last paycheck to cover 2 months of bills. She'll postpone Hannah's surgery, and they both need to focus on getting jobs. Samantha is willing to work on their issues, but she sets the condition that Curtis must go to a real psychiatrist. She also wants him to go to the community dinner on the weekend to work on his isolation. On the night of the event, Curtis is confronted by Dewart, who blames him for the work suspension. Curtis tries to ask if they can talk privately later, but Dewart keeps complaining about Curtis pushing him away when they're supposed to be friends. Dewart even pushes and punches Curtis, who fights back with a kick. Finally, Curtis explodes and flips a table over, announcing that there's a devastating storm coming and nobody is prepared for it. Afterwards, he has a breakdown and Samantha takes the chance to bring him home. Sometime later, Curtis sees Hannah in the middle of the road and runs to get her. At that moment, a bunch of birds appear in the sky and fly in weird patterns before moving towards Curtis. He protects Hannah while the birds fly past them. Then, they make another strange pattern before they start falling to the ground dead. Terrified, Curtis runs inside the house as a siren starts to go off. At that moment, he wakes up and finds out the siren is ringing for real. It's raining really hard, so Curtis grabs his family and rushes to hide in the shelter. After locking the door, Curtis makes everyone put on oxygen masks just in case. Then, they fall asleep and wait for the storm to pass. A few hours later, Curtis wakes up and checks the door, but he still feels the storm outside and goes back to sleep. In the morning, Samantha wakes him up, asking him to open the door because the storm is over. Curtis disagrees and says he can still hear it. He also makes Samantha touch the door so she can feel it. However, Samantha doesn't hear or feel anything. Panicking, Curtis backs away and refuses to open the door, offering the key to his wife. Samantha refuses to take it because doing it for him would only postpone the problem, and Curtis needs to face his fears. Wanting to be good for his family, Curtis gathers his courage and finally opens the door to find a beautiful, sunny day. The neighbors are fine and picking up the trash left by the storm. Sometime later, Samantha finally takes Curtis to the psychiatrist. The doctor agrees to give Curtis more medicine right away and decides he needs time away from the shelter. He tells the family to take a few days off to rest and prepare, as Curtis will need to be sent to a specialized facility until he recovers. This means he won't see his family for a while. The next day, the family is at the beach. Curtis and Hannah are making a sandcastle when suddenly Hannah signs the word storm while pointing at the sea. Samantha goes out and discovers it's raining oil. At that moment, the whole family sees a huge dark storm approaching in the distance, and Curtis turns to Samantha, who nods to confirm she's seeing it too, leaving in doubt whether his dreams were a premonition or if his mental illness affected his wife too. Ending the movie, Take Shelter, a drama and mystery from 2011, and I'll see you in the next video.